we don't live alone. We are all members of one body. We are all responsible for each other. And if men do not learn this lesson very soon, they will be taught it in blood, fire, and brimstone. Those are the last lines of Inspector Ghoul, a character from the 1945 morality play And Inspector Calls by J.B. Priestley. Now, in a nutshell, An Inspector Calls centers on the Burling family, who are a very, very selfish and entitled bourgeois family who only think about themselves and are the epitome of rugged individualism. One day, an inspector shows up at Mr. Burling's doorstep, and he is apparently investigating the death of one of Mr. Burling's workers, who has committed suicide as she was laid off and driven to penury, and eventually unable to bear the stress of living under the brutal and heartless capitalist society, and unable to find help from anyone. Eventually, she takes her own life by drinking poison. Of course, Mr. Burling denies being responsible for her death, since we're all individuals, aren't we? And, you know, she chose to kill herself, and he was not responsible at all for it. But eventually, the Burlings soon realized that this Inspector Ghoul is no ordinary inspector, and as he seems to know their deepest, darkest secrets. And so, basically, this was basically what we would describe as a morality play. Very much like A Christmas Carol is a morality story to guilt people into being good. And the funny thing is that An Inspector Calls was actually released in Russia, even before it was released in the UK. The first country to actually play it on stage was actually Soviet Russia. Not surprising there. Well, it took a while before it was finally released in Great Britain. But before we start today's video, I'd like to take the opportunity to wish all our Buddhist friends Happy Wesak Day. Today being a celebration of the birth and enlightenment of the very first Indian socialist, Comrade Gautama Buddha, who tried to destroy the caste system that kept the people of India in bondage. Yes, today is the day that celebrates the birth and enlightenment of Buddha. And I consider this to be a very important day because Lord Buddha is also one of my influences. Yes, I consider myself to be cut from the same cloth as the Lord Buddha. Yes, all of you people on my channel are like the silly, ignorant people of India, and I am the Buddha, trying to save you from yourselves, trying to bring enlightenment to you silly ignoramuses, you silly toadying ignoramuses who reject this gift of enlightenment by refusing to subscribe to my channel. So don't forget to subscribe to my channel, guys. My fountain of knowledge is free for all to drink from, if only you're willing to drink from it. For you, as I've said, you people are the silly, ignorant people of India, and I am the Buddha. So let's get back to An Inspector Calls. Now, as the inspector grills each and every one of the Burling family members, he reveals that each and every one of them is in fact not innocent, and each and every one of them had a hand, indirectly, in causing Eva Smith to kill herself. From Mr. Burling sacking her, to Mr. Burling's daughter basically getting her sacked again because she felt slighted by this girl, and Mr. Burling's wife thereby denying this girl welfare, because Mr. Burling's wife is supposed to be the chairperson of the welfare committee. Each and every family member had a part to play in the suicide of Eva Smith, and all of them were therefore guilty in one way or the other, even though they didn't explicitly encourage her to kill herself. So, Inspector Gould soon reveals that every single family member is in fact guilty. So, in a word, this omniscient and omnipotent inspector reveals that through their sheer selfishness, through their sheer callousness and heartlessness, all of the Burling family members have essentially murdered Eva Smith, because it is they who have driven her to suicide through their thoughtless and heartless actions. And this play is a stark reminder of why rugged individualism is not only senseless, but also deadly. And if we do not curb in our rugged individualist instincts, it will soon be the death of us. And Inspector Calls is really a bleak morality play which teaches us just how destructive the ideology of individualism, the cult of individualism, really is. Look at all this rubbish behind me. Obviously, somebody who believed that only they are important and the environment around them and the people around them are not important threw rubbish on the ground. Obviously, it took an individualistic mentality to believe that only their living space was important and that the environment around them was not important, in order to create something like this. Individualism, in a nutshell, is not just mere selfishness. Individualism is what is really destroying the environment around us. And it is not only destroying the environment around us, it is poisoning our minds and damaging our souls. And if we do not rein this destructive instinct in, eventually it will destroy us, quite literally. Perhaps the country that epitomizes the cult of rugged individualism is none other than the United States of America, which is the most capitalist country in the world. It is the epitome of laissez-faire capitalism, which then spawns this mentality of rugged individualism. In fact, in the United States, they seem to think that living alone is the normal way an adult should be. And if you live with family, for instance, as an adult, that means you are a slacker, or that means you are unable to move out of the house because you're simply too broke, and only poor people have multi-generational family units, even though that is the norm in most societies around the world. So what caused this mentality? Well, this is actually a symptom. This stigmatization of adults living with their parents is a symptom of this rugged individualist mentality. This mentality that was born out of modern capitalism. And capitalism is essentially a system that was born out of feudalism. Capitalism was basically the system that took over feudalism as a result of the contradictions which led to its takeover. Just like a snake shedding its skin, eventually society grew out of feudalism. Feudalism was the old skin of the snake. And now, the new skin of society is capitalism, which came about as a result in the shift of the mode of production from farm to factory, and the proletarianization of society, of turning farm workers into factory workers. In fact, this so-called American way of individuals being encouraged to live as atomized units is a very, very recent phenomenon. It's even more recent than capitalism, which is actually a relatively young system. Capitalism has reached its late stage, but capitalism itself is not a very, very long system. It's not a very long-lasting system, because the mode of production, which involves taking raw materials, combining those raw materials together through labor power in a factory and producing a final good with resulting surplus value, is actually a very, very recent mode of production, because machines have only existed for about 200 or so years. And it would no doubt be ahistorical and undialectical to say that capitalism was not an improvement over the feudal system. Because under the feudal system, the king, the sultan, the maharaja could kill you if they ever felt like it. A slave master could kill his slave under slave society if he felt like it. And a husband could kill his wife under slave society or under feudal society in many cases if he felt like it. So capitalism no doubt brought about improvements not only for human rights but in terms of women's rights as well, because now you have a thing known as rule of law, and you have equality before the law, or at least relative equality before the law. Capitalism is not the final stage of human evolution. Capitalism has merely, according to Karl Marx, simplified class antagonisms into two distinct camps: the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. The owners of capital, that will be the bourgeoisie, and the workers who have nothing to sell but their labor power, that will be the proletariat. And fundamentally, the bourgeoisie, according to Marxist doctrine, are not these evil, degenerate people like the equivalent of the devil. The bourgeoisie were actually a revolutionary force in feudal times because they curbed the power of the feudal lords. Most Marxists actually think very highly of bourgeois revolutionaries like Robespierre, Sun Yat-sen, and even Oliver Cromwell, because they dismantled the power of the feudal lords. In the same way, the slave rebels dismantled the power of the slaves and eventually turned the dial of history towards feudalism. And then the bourgeoisie dismantled the power of the feudal lords and turned the dial of history towards capitalism. And eventually, they will be destroyed by the very weapons that they used to destroy the feudal lords. They will fall on their own swords, so to speak, and turn the dial of history once again towards socialism, which is a society where the people own the means of production. And this society will then turn the dial of history again, according to the Marxists, towards the society known as communism, which is a classless, stateless, moneyless society. But when Professor Adam Smith wrote The Wealth of Nations in the mid-18th century, he was writing in the nascent stages of capitalist production. He had not yet reached the peak of the Industrial Revolution, when capitalism was at its most brutal stage. What Adam Smith had in mind about capitalism was very different from what Karl Marx witnessed and observed, because Adam Smith could not possibly have had the clairvoyance to predict the rise of the machines, and the upcoming exploitative society that would result. What Smith was thinking about when he thought about capitalism was petty producers. Petty producers like butchers, farmers, and artisans, each bringing their gifts to the table and conducting trade with each other in order to better each other's lives, because everyone, according to Adam Smith, has a unique skill. For example, I'm a teacher. I teach English. That's my skill. Now, I could not possibly be a brewer. I don't know how to brew coffee, or I don't know how to brew beer. But I like beer, so I teach English, and the brewer sends his son to me for English lessons. And as a result, we both benefit from each other's skill set. That's what Adam Smith had in mind. But Adam Smith never foresaw the rise of corporations. He never foresaw the rise of, massive mercantile companies like the East India Company. At least he never saw them going down the trajectory of imperialism and exploiting other nations, because Adam Smith did not live that long to get to the parasitic stage of capitalism. Adam Smith was writing about capitalism from the point of view of a very hopeful man, with hope for the future. And who knows how socialism will turn out when we actually get to that stage. We may have to shift our views if socialism doesn't turn out the way we expect. But Adam Smith fundamentally was writing in a time before capitalism had reached its late stage. And one of the symptoms of late-stage capitalism is what we call rugged individualism. Because the number one motive of capital is profit. The number one motive of the feudal lord was not profit. The number one motive of the feudal lord was land. But the capitalist covets profit in the same way the feudal lord covets land. So when you have a bunch of capitalists like Mr. Burling fighting amongst each other, eventually there comes a point when they have to result in the most cutthroat, brutal, and shall we say heartless methods in order to survive. And eventually they start to develop a very hardened mentality. That's why the alliteration cutthroat capitalist seems so fitting, because in order to survive, the capitalist must fundamentally look out for his own interests first, over the interests of the community. And if that means cutting corners left, right and center, the capitalist will do it, because the capitalist lives for profit. The capitalist's survival is incumbent on whether he makes a profit or a loss. And so, this system eventually leads to what we can only describe as rugged individualism, free trade, or shall we say, the brutality of free trade, when there are no rules and everyone can resort to whatever they want to do to come out as the winner. And as we talked about in a previous video about base and superstructure, the superstructure, or the popular ideas of the ruling class, vary depending on who the ruling class is. So under the feudal ruling class, the popular ideas might have included loyalty to the monarch and loyalty to the religious figures. And in fact, Malaysia is still semi-feudal in its nature. But the popular ideas of capitalism, one of the most popular ideas under capitalism, which is thereby one of the most popular ideas in America, is the idea of rugged individualism. The idea that we're all in competition against each other, life is a battlefield, the best man wins, the winner takes everything, and the loser gets nothing. That is fundamentally one of the ideas or one of the norms that arose from this cutthroat capitalist system in which profit is the number one driving force for everybody. And people are either instruments in order to produce the profit for you, or they're either worthless obstacles that need to be pushed aside because they stand in the way of your profit. But in a world that has enough to fulfill everyone's needs, but not everyone's greed, I argue that this mentality that the best man gets everything and the loser takes nothing is really a destructive one, because what you have in a society like America, which takes this mentality to heart and really practices it to the letter, is a society of many unhappy people who have gotten nothing and are very, very cruelly disparaged as losers. And I never use the word loser to describe even my worst enemies, because I don't think that poverty is a character flaw. You have a society in America where like America, for example, where the rich are ultra rich, and basically they're the ones who hog all the resources and finances, and the losers are kind of demonized. Yeah, you're actually demonized for being poor. You see how what kind of an insult the word loser, what kind of an insulting connotation the word loser brings with it. It's very, very clear to me that in a rugged individualist society, they have no compassion, absolutely no compassion to those who have fallen through the cracks, because in this type of society, it's every man for himself. It would be, as you could call it, a Thatcherian type of society. But that is not the type of society we want for our children. It would be a most unpleasant society in which we don't live and work together as a team, but rather regard each other as enemies. And there are even practical reasons why this type of society is not sustainable in the long run. There's a good reason why tribal leaders did not hog all the resources to themselves and did not hog everything to themselves and their families. There's a good reason why tribal leaders made sure that every single person in the tribe was, to a certain extent, provided for. It wasn't out of the goodness of the tribal leader's heart. It served a very pragmatic function, because the tribal leader understood that a child that does not feel the love of the village will burn it down to feel its warmth. The movie The Joker with Joaquin Phoenix should have told us should have educated us about the danger of allowing people to fall through the cracks and demonizing victims of capitalism, demonizing victims of a system that has screwed them over, in which they have lost, of demonizing the losers of this cruel and barbaric system, this primitive warlike instinct of the caveman who lived in an atomized unit in his own cave, who regarded only his own cave as important. I'm afraid that this warlike, savage instinct is being triggered again with the dismantling of the tribal and feudal systems. Capitalism has basically triggered this instinct once again, and it is only through socialism that we can somehow rein in this instinct. Well, of course, defenders of rugged individualism will then say, so you say the cavemen practice this instinct, so I'm a rugged individualist, and it's just natural then, I can't help it. Well, you know, a lot of things are also natural that we do help. For instance, if you see an attractive woman on the street, and you know, there's a thing called consent. You might feel like fucking her, but you do have a sense of, you have to restrain your instincts, because there's a thing known as consent, and there's there's a thing known as rape if you don't rein in your instincts from doing exactly what you want, right? So we cannot be all complete individualists in this world that we live in. We have to respect people's rights, and we have to understand that our actions in the end lead towards the destruction of others and the destruction of those around us. And this can have a detrimental effect on us in turn. Well, let me give you an example. Suppose there were a couple of blokes in a boat rowing this boat at sea because they've been put in a situation where they basically are stuck in a lifeboat, and they have to row this lifeboat to shore together. They have to work together. Now, suppose the people in this boat do not like each other. It would be absolutely stupid for all of them to then refuse to row and refuse to work together, because none of them would get to shore that way. The same thing applies to rugged individualism. It is a senseless mentality that not only leads to the destruction of the environment and the people around us, but leads to our own destruction in the end. Because if everybody is pursuing their own interests and refusing to regard themselves as units of a tribe around them, eventually this society that we create is going to be a society of pandemonium, a society in which nobody can actually sit down together and work together towards a mutually beneficial goal that will serve the needs of the many instead of the needs of only a few. And eventually, society will deteriorate. Republican politicians or Republican figures like Thomas Sowell always lament the decline of culture. They lament the loss of manners, the loss of proper cultural norms, and they never seem to link this with the rugged individualism that they push so hard on society. They encourage everybody to be a rugged individualist, a brutal, cutthroat capitalist, and a heartless competitor who steps over others to advance and refuses to help the poor and needy, right? And as a result of this cruel, brutal system which demonizes the losers and radicalizes them, you have mass shootings, you have stabbings, you have a very, very unhappy population of people who have fallen through the cracks of this system. And yet, you still have these right-wing figures refusing to condemn the very source of this problem, which is the rugged individualism that they encourage, that causes it in the first place. And this is not some moralistic argument. You can even observe it in nature itself. Animals that are well fed and well provided for are less likely to be feral. In fact, a feral animal is most likely a hungry animal. An animal that is well fed and feels secure is less likely to attack humans because it has its material conditions met, you see. So you cannot demand for people's behavior to improve if they are being treated like shit and their material conditions are shit, because people are only as good as their material conditions allow them to be. And under rugged individualism, well, people are only as good as it is profitable, you see. Use value is not of concern to the capitalists whenever they think about producing a new good or a new service. Use value to the community is of no consequence to them. What matters to the capitalist is profit. So if something evil is to be produced, like cocaine or heroin, for example, or opium, something evil, but it's profitable, most capitalists would not think twice about producing this good and distributing this good. Because fundamentally, the rugged individualist mentality of the capitalist places his own well-being and his own family's well-being above the well-being of the masses. It doesn't matter how many lives he destroys. He's not forcing people to take the cocaine or the opium, apparently. You took it yourself. But the demand for this drug is basically created by the miserable material conditions of the masses in the first place. You can even link this to alcoholism. You know, in a society where all of our material conditions were met, alcoholism and drug abuse would not even be a problem in the first place. Now, to end this video, I would like to quote the words of Chin Peng, or On Bong Hua, the Secretary General of the Communist Party of Malaysia. Chin Peng once said that greed and materialism cannot be the basis of a lasting society. These only serve short-term objectives. What is more important are the values of generosity and compassion, and these have been the values that have sustained civilizations for all of human history. Rugged individualism may indeed be a natural instinct. It may be an instinct that is natural in the same way it is natural for a predatory animal to prey on a weaker animal. But if we don't rein in this dark predatory instinct, eventually it will be the death of all of us. So we can choose whether to advance as a species or basically regress to our more savage, primordial nature. The choice is ours. But again, I reiterate, we don't live alone. We are all members of one body. We are all responsible for each other. And if men do not learn this lesson very soon, they will be taught it in blood, fire, and brimstone. Thank you very much, and have a wonderful day.